Hello, everyone. In this two-part video, I'm going to introduce a new color selection tool that I created. Now, the reason why I did this is because the primary benefits of this tool is that it allows you to put in two starting colors, and then it helps you generate a selection of colors that work with those two starting colors. Usually, when you have some sort of color selection tool or way to create a color palette, it only lets you put in one color, and so it's sort of limiting because I often find myself in situations where I know at least two colors. So the reason for two videos are because of this. The first video, this one, I'm going to do sort of the theory about why it works or how it works. In the second video, I will get into a little bit of how to actually use this tool, sort of the steps that you need to go to make it work. I'm not the best programmer, so the user interface is not as smooth as it could be, but that's what it is. And so you can see it's actually in Illustrator is where I built this tool, if you notice. So let me just show you quickly how it might work. This is one example where I've started with two colors, but what I'll do is I'll just take color one, let's say, over here, and I'm just going to change the color. I'll just set it to some other color, and I'll take this color here and just for purposes change it to a different color. Maybe those aren't the two greatest colors in the world. That's a little dark, but we'll go for it anyway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a script. And I'll go into the details in the other video about how to actually do this and find it and whatnot. And I should mention as I'm doing this too, that I'll put links in the description to this Illustrator file and the script so you can use it. So there we go. I put in this sort of cyan color and this brown color, and it's given me a new set of colors that will work with it. And of course, you're not going to use all these colors, so let me briefly talk about sort of why it's happening and what you might use to do it. Um, I just want to reiterate again, the reason why I did do this is because I'm often find myself in situations where I want two colors. One example out of many is I work for university and colleges. They always have two colors as part of their standard colors. Usually most colleges colors are sort of not they're typical. There's only a handful across the whole United States. They're boring. If you want to do something interesting with them, you have to sort of find other colors that go with it. So if you know two colors, say college colors, you can put them in an input, run the script, and then come up with a variety of other colors that might be more unique and more interesting and stand out as a way to use it. So that's one reason how I've used it. But I often find myself like, these are two colors I really like. I really want to use. What else can I use? And standard other tools don't give you that ability. So to make this work, basically there are three things that need to be true in theory. One is that any two colors do go together. Two, selecting the color palette from there is just understanding patterns, simple patterns. And then three, there's not just one true color wheel, but really an infinite variety of color wheels. Now, these statements aren't necessarily what is typically discussed in color theory, though I do think they all come out of color theory when you look at them a little bit. Now, I'm not going to go into proving those 3 points all in this video. I'll show about why they're important for this video. I do have several other videos on color theory that do get a little bit more into why these are true in the first place. So if you want to see them, they're actually a little more interactive than this video. I encourage you to look at them, and I'll put the links in the descriptions. So the first statement I made was that any two colors are true or can go together. They work together, and I want to say that's generally true. The reality is, of course, there might be reasons why two colors don't go together. Those reasons tend to be more reasons based on, say, cultural interpretation or the way people perceive colors differently than other people, and there's a variety of reasons for that. So those are cases around the edges, though I don't think they disprove it, the rule. So in general, what I'm saying is usually always two colors go together, and certainly at the simple based theory level, not practice level, that is definitely true. And so I'll simply state again, as I mentioned in some of the other videos, when you look at traditional color theory, it'll give you different harmonies, like here, use these three colors together, or use these four colors together, or so on and so forth. And when you actually take all the standard ones together and look at them completely, you'll see this to be true. They don't say it, but you can pick any two colors. You're like, oh yeah, that is actually goes together with this harmony rule, or these two colors are in that harmony rule. There any two at least pure hues, they will end up in a traditional harmony rule. To any two colors essentially do go together because of that, even though they might not say that. And so with that, if any two colors do go together, the simple question is, well, then why aren't there any tools like the one I've developed here that allow that to happen? Because it has to be true. There is a harmony rule in color theory that will match any two hues together at the base level. And so that's what I've created here. I've just sort of turned that on its edge and done this. Now, you will see one of the things I have done is I'm not just working with hues as often as the start of color wheels or whatnot in other color theory. I am taking in saturation, value, brightness, things of that nature as well, which I'll discuss here a little bit in a few more minutes. The second thing that I said was true. Essentially, was that there are patterns. It's just a simple pattern of picking colors. And so, again, traditional color theory, they look at triangles and squares and things like this. Here, I've just sort of taken it here, and I have one preset up where input the first input goes here, the second input goes here, and then these little circles are just guides to help you give a pattern. And so like, oh, that purple or this one, these greens could also work. And I'll go more into this detail of how to use this in another video because I got several ways of doing this. But you can see if I just rotate this, I can change where those locations are, and it equally changes it around the color wheel. But essentially, you can think of it as like an a pattern currently, because they're this color and this color are all spaced equally, and this color and this color and this color and that color and so on are all spaced equally. But if I kept going, say I pulled it to here, then I've got sort of like an A spacing and then a B spacing that's a little longer, and then an A and an A and a B and an A. So you can see just around the color wheel, it's just a simple pattern that it makes out. And some of these, when I pull some of the colors out further or in deeper, it's just visual clues also for making those patterns. They're third, quarter, and half points of the color wheel. You don't have to use them, but they're just, again, visual ways of thinking about this as a pattern. And again, traditional color theory thinks of it as the same way. And so you would say, okay, I got these two colors. Well, here's a set of other colors that work with it. And then I also work with sort of some tints and shades as well, because variation is always good. So really, you can use any of these colors that you want to do to build sort of a richer, deeper color palette if you want. And I think the most controversial, if you will, thing that I've said is the third point, which is I've created a custom color wheel for this. And it's done a few things. Um, the first, which is really nice, is that, again, this is not just a color wheel based on hue. It's taken in saturation and brightness around, so it helps visualize the colors a little better. But I think that the thing that be asking is, can you just make a custom color wheel on which to set patterns? Does that work, or are you cheating? And the short answer is yes, I can create them. And I encourage anyone to check out some of those other videos where I go into this in a little more depth. But fundamentally, there's not just one color wheel. Most people at first, they learn the red, yellow, blue as primary color wheels primary colors that set up one type of color wheel. But there are other common ones as well, like RGB, red, green, blue has a color wheel that can be used. CMYK, there's the 4 colors of lab color, which is really interesting. And I go over some of that in those other videos, as I've mentioned. But the point being, though, really, when you look at those other videos that I've done the same thing with patterns. The difference is, as I've explained there, is that the patterns are done proportionally to one another. Here on this screen, the nice thing is that they're equal. Like this A is equal to A, this B is equal to this B, and it's perfectly equal to the same scale in pattern. In the other videos, when you don't use custom color wheels, you have to do your patterns proportionally. They produce the same answers, and proportion is a great way to do patterns. Lots of great architecture and other designs rely on proportions all the time. The thing is, proportions are a lot harder to understand than just regular things at equal scale. And just a couple examples of this, like as I mentioned, I teach at a college and university. Just the other day, I was in a presentation by another faculty member up here on campus. Of course, everyone's very intelligent. This person doesn't deal with math, they don't deal with design, they don't deal with geometry and things like this. And in their course of their presentation, they used the word proportion and they used it incorrectly. It's harder to understand. Same thing when I teach design principles in class. Proportion is always the hardest thing for students to get. And so that's a long way of saying I developed this sheet, this tool, because proportion is hard. So even though I think I understand it pretty well, it's still harder for me to understand. I'd rather look at it like this. And so I can create a custom color wheel to take the proportion out of the patterns from it to make them just simply equal to each other. So again, you could give me any color wheel, a RYB or an RGB, and I'd get essentially the same thing. If I wanted to, it just is more complicated, it's harder to look at, and so on and so forth. So the great thing about this tool, again, is not only can it put in two colors, but it creates this color wheel that allows me to visualize it very easily and select simple colors that work with it. And that was really the goal here. Now, before I end this video, you'll notice that there are a few other things on the sheet besides the color wheel. So, I've just been saying things around the whole color wheel, which is what a lot of color theory does traditionally. Not all of it, but most of it. I like to call that loop because it's looping around this whole wheel. But that's not the only way to think about it. So you can also think about, in this case, the way I've built it, half the color wheel, half to the right and half to the left. And so I could really build a palette with just this right side. I don't even need to worry about the greens, or vice versa. I could just look at this side and not worry about these purples on that side. I call that sector. So I have these little notes down here. Again, I might go more into that in the next video. And there's two bars down here, which I just want to briefly talk about. One is called extended, and basically the way extended works is I could have built this on a color wheel and I didn't, but there's basically a hue difference between our first and second color, and a saturation difference and a brightness difference between these two colors. And so I just mathematically worked them out. Now this color over here on the right is the same hue difference between here and here, but applied from here to whatever would be next. The same with saturation. The saturation difference between these two is the same as between these two, and the brightness value between these two is the same as between these two. And so it just creates that number and applies it at all three levels. And then this color is the same thing. The difference between here and here, and the difference between here and here is the same as here and here, and the difference between here and here is the same as there and there, and so on and so forth. Of course, I can work this the opposite way. So the difference between here and here is the same as the difference between here and here, and here and here and here and here. And actually, the one little tweak I did make to it, without going into too much detail about it, is that makes sense for the color, because color goes all the way around and keeps going, and I can keep making this add up and add up and add up. Brightness and saturation, I had to sort of reevaluate as a color wheel because they sort of have ends. They aren't closed loops. So I made them sort of like a wave. Like white would then start to go back to dark, and then once you're at the dark, it would start to go back to white, and so on and so forth, which is why you get sort of this light, it's lightening and then darkening and lightening on each side. Fundamentally, any of these colors in theory work together. You're not likely to use all of them, so I don't have any extra bars like here, but you can imagine, I pick a few colors, like, I'll pick this color and this color and this color and then that color to create a little pattern inside of it. The last bar I have down here is what I call blend. Essentially, everything else up here, it works on the HSB scale in data. The blend actually works with RGB, and so it's just a different way of doing the calculations, and I'm just taking the two colors and you blend them together. It's essentially what the gradient tool in Photoshop and Illustrator does, but it just sort of pulls them out. And again, I put the highs and lows are just, any of those colors work, but the highs and lows is sort of think about patterns. So you're not likely to use all 12 or 13 of those colors. So if you want to just think of a pattern like, I'll choose this one, and this one, they're equally spaced apart. It just helps you think through that process. So that's basically how, or I should say, this is basically why this tool works. Actually, how to use this tool I will do in a follow-up video. And if you do want to know more, check out any of the other videos. I think the most important thing to remember is that any colors really work together. Don't be frightened. If you like a color, just use it. And any tool, including this one, just be as a guide and ultimately have fun and keep making great drawings. Thanks.